For this afternoon, we will take a look at developing positive habits and routines. Now, I would like to begin this particular session by looking at the most important factor in the learning of the students and also in the formation in character of the students. And I'm talking about you. I'm talking about us. I'm talking about teachers because we all play a crucial or critical role in the learning of our students. In fact, the research tells us that we are the most important factor in the learning of the students, including their character formation. And not only research, I would assume, and my assumption is correct, that you have had experience successful teaching, you have had experience effective teaching, which actually resulted into learning on the part of your students. And therefore, this particular research tells us that it is confirmed because we have experienced it. And therefore, I think it is very important to emphasize the point that when we talk about the formation of our students, particularly in developing positive habits and attitudes, it has to begin with us. Because when we talk about the teacher is actually the curriculum. He is not only the hidden curriculum. Because when we talk about successful schooling, successful teaching, successful implementation of the curriculum, we have to take a look at not only the teaching skills or the knowledge of teaching of the teacher, but rather his character, his personality. And when we take a look at what research is telling us, we realize then that we cannot be good teachers or good character educators if we do not show kindness to our students, if we do not show support to our students. Because precisely when we talk about kindness and support coming from the teacher, it means that the teacher is a person who is not only a professional, but a caring professional. And therefore, I would like to invite everyone to take a look at this particular quotation from Horace Mann. So when we talk about the public school system in the Philippines, do remember that it was brought here by the Americans beginning in 1901 with the establishment of the public school system. Now, in the case of the US, it was actually Horace Mann who strengthened the public school system. And Horace Mann said, teachers teach because they care. And precisely in this particular session, in cultivating character, we are going to dig deeper into this particular idea of the teacher as a warm demander. So meaning to say, not apathetic, not cold, not angry, looking for trouble because of what the students do inside the classroom, meaning hot. It is in between. He demands from the students, but that particular demand coming from the teacher is a demand from someone who cares. Precisely, we go back to that particular points a while ago regarding number one, kindness. Number two, support. And this particular session then will help us seek answers. But more importantly, I think as reflective practitioners, we will have to reflect on these answers. Meaning to say, if I want to become a good character educator, I have to be a warm demander because that is the only way I will be able to enhance, cultivate, develop positive habits and attitudes on the part of my students. And excuse me. And just like what I said a while ago, the session will provide us with answers. But I think more important than the answers is number one, a learning conversation between the answers and ourselves. Meaning to say, we have to reflect. At the same time, when we reflect, I think it is important that as reflective practitioners, we learn from our reflection and come up with conclusions, or more importantly, decisions that need to be implemented in our classroom. So then I would like everyone to not only take a look at the answers, to know the answers, but at the same time to reflect on how you can apply these answers in your own context. And here is a question coming from Catalyst that basically will guide everyone. That basically will guide everyone. Excuse me for a while. And this particular question is the most important question that we need to explore, that we need to have answers in this particular seminar. Let me just, because it's not moving, it's stuck. Okay. So how can teachers support students, your own students? How can I support my students in establishing positive habits and routines, including attitudes that contribute to their character formation? And precisely just like what I said a while ago, when we talk about these positive habits, attitudes, and routines that we need to develop among our students, we need to examine ourselves, our teaching, our passion for teaching, our the way we conduct our lessons, etc. And precisely, this is an opportunity to do so. So 1 minute, I would like to everyone, you are the person of the day. And this is the question, who am I as a teacher? And precisely, do I take character education very seriously? So who am I as a teacher? And do I take character education very seriously? I invite everyone to reflect on this particular question. And if you want, you can type your answers, okay? Or you can jot down notes. And then hopefully later on, we'll be able to have time to take a look at your answers. All right, we move on. So in order to facilitate learning on your part, and especially reflection on your part, we have a guide, a discussion guide. And this is the sequence. We will take a look at three very important questions. And later on, when we take a look at the four key areas, each question will basically guide us throughout each key area. The first question is, everything that we're going to talk about has something to do with what the research is telling us. Meaning to say, what is the research telling us about the key areas where these positive habits and routines will be most likely located? And we will identify those key areas based on the research findings. The second question has something to do with methods and strategies, particularly teaching practices. And therefore, if we have identified the four key areas and very specific routine or habit in each key area, how can I facilitate my students' acquisition, practice, and development of these positive habits and routines? So the first one is we identify the key areas. Number two, how do I help my students develop competence in these key areas? But I think the third one is probably the most important because it does not only answer the question what or how, but it answers the question why. It answers the question why. Why are these teaching practices important in developing character? So we're going to take a look at the everyday scenario inside the classroom. It does not matter whether you are a social studies teacher or a math teacher, whether in the preschool, in the elementary school, or the senior high school, or even probably in the university setting. We're going to take a look at, okay, number one, we identify what are those positive habits and routines that we need to develop among our students based on what the research is telling us. The second question is, so how do we develop these positive habits and routines inside the classroom? How do we plan them? How do we implement them? How do we have a successful teaching of these habits and routines? And then the third one is why? Why do we have to pay attention to these positive habits and routines? Therefore, we're saying what is the connection of the teaching these positive habits and routines, emphasizing them to developing character or character education? So three very important questions, which will basically be the sequence of our discussion. So let's pause and think for a while, probably a minute or two. Remember, so I would like now to pose the second question because most probably these are the questions that are closest to your heart and easier to know because you are teaching. And the question is, what are the teaching practices that develop positive habits and routines? Very general. We have not yet identified the key areas. In other words, what are the instructional practices or decisions teachers need to implement to grow successful students through their everyday disciplined actions? Because when we talk about a habit, when we talk about a routine, all right, we talk about a daily disciplined commitment and action on the part of the student. So it's a daily disciplined commitment and eventually action on the part of the student. Because when you talk about commitment, the student has internalized it. So if the student has internalized it, it means the student owns it. It is not imposed from the outside. Okay? So second question, let's take a look at the second question, a more specific question. In other words, what are the instructional decisions we need to implement to grow successful students in our own classrooms because of their everyday discipline commitment to action? Maybe what you can do is to write you down your notes and then later on let's try to see and confirm, okay, your notes vis-a-vis the notes that I will be giving you later. Okay, probably the fastest 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, let's now take a look at the first question. Okay, the first question. And the first question, when we talk about the research findings, we will take a look at the overall source of what are those positive habits and routines. And the overall source is it's a framework that focuses on students, definitely. It does not focus on the teacher. It does not focus on teaching. Because we all know that when we talk about effective teaching, there has to be learning. There are two sides of the same coin, teaching and learning. The only way we can tap ourselves on the back and tell ourselves that we have done a good job is when we realize that our students have learned. Therefore, the overall framework that we are using focuses on learning, learning on the part of the students. And that learning is very comprehensive. It's not only talking about academic learning, it also talks about character education or character development. As Marva Collins would say, when we talk about teaching, It has to be learning. Because as she said, I am a teacher. A teacher is someone who leads. There is no magic here. I do not walk on water. I do not part the sea. I just love children. So this particular framework focuses on that particular central idea of the learner. It's a focus on the learner. And here, Marva Collins, a renowned African American educator in the 1960s, aptly captured that particular focus on the student. Because we all know when we talk about teaching, when we talk about education, when we talk about ourselves, our identity as educators, it means that we are passionate about students. We are passionate about learning, not only teaching. All right. So, therefore, we derive the positive attitudes and routines and habits from the visible learning framework. From the visible learning framework. If you take a look at that particular framework, especially when you concentrate on the learning segment or portion of that particular framework, you'll probably be able to identify more than 100 factors in the learning of the students. And what I did was to take a look at that particular framework, study it well, and identified 8 until I came down to 4, which I will present later. So this is the source of the positive routines and habits, the visible learning framework. It's not only a meta-analysis, all right? When you combine several studies and take a look at the results of what influences the learning of the students, or what needs to be emphasized in the learning of the students. In fact, it's a meta analysis. It's an analysis of meta analysis, plural, thousands of meta analysis. And in this particular visible learning framework, we will now take a look at what the framework is telling us, and we will concentrate on teaching and learning not only academics, right? But we will focus actually on the effects of what we do inside the classroom as teachers of academics and how those effects will develop these particular routines and habits on the part of the students. Therefore, this is about teaching and learning character. Because here, as you can see, one of the most critical findings was how important it is to make teaching and learning visible. Therefore, our conclusion is we agree. We have to make teaching and especially learning visible, not only to the teachers, our colleagues right now, we who are in this particular Zoom room, but also make it visible to our students. But more importantly, we agree because we're talking about character education here. We make the teaching and the learning of positive behavior visible. It's visible to us. And we make it also visible to the students in the way we plan our lessons, in the way we communicate our objectives, in the way we teach our lessons, in the way we deal with them, even outside of the classroom, etc. So this is precisely what the seminar is all about. So therefore, character counts. Because what we're trying to do now is to take a look at that particular framework and then transform it into something that is connected to character education. Because we are seeking parity. We are seeking parity. You have to realize that when you plan a good lesson, when you implement a good teaching method, when you assess fairly, when you provide feedback to the students that would allow the students to actually improve his or her work, it does not only improve academics. It does not only improve academics. In fact, later on, we will realize, we will clearly see that those positive routines and habits do not only improve academics, but are actually connected to the core or the essence of education, which is character education. So meaning to say, good character education is good education. Good character education is good education. When we teach well, the academic subject matter or content that we are teaching, we promote character education. When we teach the positive habits, routines, and attitudes, right? We are also not only teaching character education, but we are promoting learning in general. All right. So let's now take a look at, okay. So we will now take a look at the four key habits and routines. The four key habits and routines. So visible learning framework, several hundred indicators, several hundred important ideas, zeroed in on four. And we will try to see the connections later on. Number one, we take a look at the general area of executive functioning. But I would like to emphasize a very important and sometimes neglected positive habit or routine or even attitude. As some character educators would say, habitude, because it's a combination of habit and attitude. And that is attention control. Okay? We need to teach our students how to control their attention. That's one, executive functioning. Number two, motivation. And of course, the twin, engagement. But we will concentrate on a very important point about motivation, which is also contained in self-determination theory. But it is also quite visible in the visible learning framework. It's about belonging. It's about belonging. Identifying myself with the class because the class is a community. Identifying with the school because my school, I am proud of it. The third area is what we call self-efficacy. But we will take a look at the idea of confidence. So meaning to say, number one, positive attitude, positive routine. Number one, attention control. Positive habit, positive routine. Number two, belonging. And number three, confidence. The fourth one is in the general area of positive attitude based on the visible learning framework. But we're going to take a look at curiosity. Curiosity. There could be a fifth one, a sixth one, a seventh one, an eighth one. But I think these four, and also considering the time frame that we are here for 1 hour and 30 minutes, I think are the most important. I think are the most important. When we cover them, but more importantly, we uncover them, we take out the veil so that we will have a clear idea of what these particular routines and habits are. We will have a clear indication regarding what needs to be emphasized in our planning of the lessons in the academic content because and the teaching of these lessons, because when we do so, when we employ the teaching practices that develop or develop the teaching practices that develop these particular positive habits and routines, then we can clearly see the impact not only on academics but also on character education. Remember, we seek parity. So I would like now, it's just like a KWL that you normally use. Okay. What do I know? Unearthing background knowledge about number one, controlling one's attention, attention control. Number two, belongingness, or as many people would say, relatedness. Confidence, curiosity, alphabetical. Attention, belongingness or relatedness, confidence, and curiosity. These are the four habits. These are the four routines or attitudes. A minute or two. What do I know about them? Probably you can extend What do I want to know about them? And hopefully later on, why did I learn? What did I learn about them? Or even probably, how did I learn about them? So motto, 1A, 1B, 2 C's in 2024, right? Easy to remember, easy to recall. 1A, 1B, and then 2 C's in 2024, meaning to say the rest of the school year and hopefully next school year. A, attention or attention control. B, belongingness. And then C, curiosity and confidence. 1A, 1B, 2 C's. All right, so are we ready? Let's now take a look at number 1. And let's now take a look at attention control. So let's first try to take a look at the concept because I think it is important to define the concept, to get hold of that particular concept. And if you take a look at the first point here, you realize then that attention is very important. When people pay attention, meaning to say, it is important to them. And normally, when we request, require, motivate, engage our students to pay attention to something, we know that it is important to them. Because just like what I said, when we talk about teaching, right, what we are teaching them has a consequence. And that particular consequence is learning on their part. And we all know that they have to learn something that they need to learn. So it is important. And therefore, when you talk about that particular attention, then we are interested in selective attention. So they focus on the content that we are teaching them. They have to focus on the performance tasks that they have to produce or they have to perform in public, or they have to focus on the group work. They have to focus on listening to their classmates. So meaning to say, we are pointing out the importance of attention control in the context of what we do inside the classroom. Because when we talk about attention, we realize then that we are not actually teaching if our students are not paying attention. We are not teaching if our students are not paying attention. We first have to teach them how to focus their attention on something that is important. Whether that something that is important has something to do with academic content or social emotional learning or precisely developing their character. So again, very simple saying, I am not teaching, right, if my students are not listening. It is not only a principle actually in classroom management. It's an overarching principle that basically covers everything that we do in the context of the school, especially in the context where the rubber meets the road, the classroom. Now, to understand attention, let's take a look at these particular dilemmas on the part of the teacher, right? So, for example, take a look at the last one. Not paying attention, maybe daydreaming, or impulsive talking, talking out of turn. Not paying attention because probably, number one, very slow in producing the work. In fact, okay, sometimes we are frustrated because they don't finish the work. Or take a look at the third one, disorganized folder, disorganized notes, disorganized bag, etc. And we realize then that if we take a look at the five, including the second one, including the fourth one, drawing unrelated pictures, we detect right away, okay, slight, okay, initial, we detect that there is a connection of character education in terms of there is a connection to forming our students, cultivating their character in helping them pay attention. And I would like now to take a look at what we call the teaching practices that will allow us to help our students or enhance their capability to pay attention. Okay, so we begin first with the brain and attention. Now, take note of the fact that neuroeducation or neuroscience clearly tells us that when students process every detail, they spend too much intellectual energy, right? And because there's too much intellectual energy, there are too many details, they cannot concentrate, they cannot focus, they cannot pay attention. And therefore, the first teaching practice that we need to emphasize is something that comes from Kobe. Start with an end in mind. And that particular teaching practice means we always begin our unit, we begin the project, we begin the performance task, we begin the lesson, we begin teaching considering the North Star. That's number one. Very important. And that particular North Star actually is the outcome, the learning outcome. In other words, the objectives. If we're talking about the lesson plan, the daily objectives. If we're talking about the unit plan, we're talking about the unit goals. If we're talking about the character education program, then the character education outcomes. It is always important that if we are going to help our students pay attention, that we communicate to them, make it visible to them, the objectives of a lesson, the objectives of a unit, the goals of a unit rather, the goals, for example, of a group work, or the outcomes of a performance task. So that's the first thing that we need to point out. We always begin with the end in mind in order to enhance our students' attention. And let's now take a look a peek into the connection to character education. Now, this is just an initial. Later on, we'll take a look at a full-blown connection to character education. When students pay attention, they develop perseverance. They develop grit. And when you talk about grit, actually, it is staying the course. You stay on the course. That despite the difficulties, despite the challenges, okay, you pay attention. You focus on your work. Because when you talk about that particular point, then grit is about being able to commit over time and remain loyal to something higher than yourself, meaning to say the goals, meaning to say the objectives, meaning to say the outcomes. So therefore, when we take a look at attention control, and attention control is important when we talk about not only teaching, but also not only about learning the academic content, but also character education, precisely because we said a while ago, I am not teaching if my students are not listening or paying attention. And here, we can clearly see a connection between character education and the teaching practice that actually enhances students' attention. Something to do with goals, something to do with objectives, something to do with outcomes. Because grit is developed when the students commit to something higher than themselves. All right? And that is the goal, whether it's a unit, whether it's a performance task, whether it's an objective, whether it's a service learning program, when they go out into the community, when they find out things about the community, and then serve the community while at the same time learning about the academic content. So here, initially, even the teaching practice has a connection with character education. We can clearly see that actually when we talk about cultivating character, developing positive routines, positive habits, positive attitudes, there's actually no dichotomy between learning the academic content and learning how to become a good citizen, how to become a good person, how to become someone who is charitable, who is kind, etc. So character education. So do we have more strategies? Attention control. Let me give you probably a minute again, a minute or two. Attention control. Okay, let me just open the door. Sorry, I live in a condo unit. Someone is okay. Just a minute. All right. Okay. So do we have more strategies? And what are those strategies? Attention control. So let's now take a look at the next one. Here are a couple of more strategies. Okay, second one, avoid overload. Because the students, if there is overload, they cannot pay attention. They cannot focus. So meaning to say, where does this particular strategy come from or teaching practice come from? From Carl Rogers, when he said, the basic idea, the most basic idea behind teaching is to teach people what they need to know. So, meaning to say, if we are going to avoid overload, we have to teach them only the essential content. We have to teach them the essential content. So they will not be distracted by something that is not essential to them. Okay. So we are reminded many, many years ago, probably more than 10 years ago, when understanding by design was introduced in the Philippines. And we were introduced to key concepts like a big idea, enduring understanding, essential question, etc., etc., including the grass. And until today, it makes a lot of sense. Even probably that particular framework is already dated or maybe even outdated, as some people would probably say. The central core, the essence of that particular framework still lives on, particularly when we talk about controlling the attention of the students or allowing them executive function to actually manage manage their attention. So remember, plan my attention, monitor my attention, manage my attention kasi executive control na siya. We teach the essential content. And we all know that it entails a lot of good planning on our part. Another strategy, and probably a not so pleasant surprise on your part, is what we call monitoring the time on task. So it's about time management. Time management. So here, many times we discard or disregard the idea that when we talk about teaching our students, probably in terms of doing the research, probably in terms of doing group work, etc., we probably concentrate on the content or probably intergroup relationships that sometimes we forget that there is a need to focus on making sure that we develop in them attention control. And one of the most important teaching practices in attention control is precisely we teach them how to manage their time. We teach them how to manage their time. That's the third one. Okay. So I would like now to give everyone again a minute to take a look at this particular question. What evidence shall you give that indeed you are paying attention to attention in your classroom? Take a look at your teaching practices and take a look at the three teaching practices that we just enumerated and explained a while ago. Okay, so number one, attention control, discussion sequence. Number two, what are the teaching practices? There were three. And then later on, number three, we connect it to character education. But for the meantime, before we take a look at that particular connection, what evidence will you give that indeed you are paying attention to attention in your classroom? All right. Okay. So hopefully later on we can take a look at your answers. So here is now the connection to character education. The third, why are these teaching practices important from the perspective or from the view of character education? Paying attention is a responsibility. And in character education, we develop student accountability and responsibility. Because if we take a look at that particular point regarding the importance of developing student responsibility, we should make them realize that their actions or lack of action actually impact not only themselves, but others. Their action or lack of action actually impact others. It does not only affect themselves. And this particular point regarding paying attention is a responsibility is something that is emphasized in some in a segment of the literature in character education. And precisely, if you take a look at the source of this particular quotation, it comes from the area of soft skills. What are the most important soft skills that actually students must acquire and practice, okay, in order for them to become good children, meaning to say a good citizen, a good neighbor, a good student, etc. So paying attention is a responsibility. Okay. So let's have a commitment on your part. Finish the sentence. I must facilitate the development of attention among my students because. All right, let's now take a look at the second one. Okay, are we ready? Let's now take a look at the second one. Take a look at the discussion sequence again, try to recall it. So we will now try to take a look at belonging. Belonging. Remember, in self-determination theory, we talk about autonomy. We talk about competence. But another aspect of self-determination theory, okay, of Ryan, I forgot the second author, has something to do with relatedness or belongingness. We will not talk about SDT here, but we'll take a look at the literature, particularly the visible learning framework about belonging. Let's first try to get hold of the concept again. So when we talk about relatedness, belonging, or some people would say identity, this is the extent to which the students, our students in our own classrooms, feel that they are accepted and therefore they belong to the community. They belong to a community. And this particular point that they're accepted, it means that they feel that they are important, that they are a part of that particular community. And I think if you take a look at the definition, again, we take a look at what teachers do. Teachers, right? The warm demander, the caring individual, they 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 are kind and they provide support. Okay. And we will take a look at that particular what types of support or what kinds of support that a teacher provides in that particular environment where they are. So that is the definition of belonging. And here is a quotation coming from a 2008 State of Virginia Teacher of the Year awardee that actually gives us a clear idea of what that particular positive habit or routine is all about. It's about when we are teaching, we are not teaching a class. Again, when we are teaching, we are not teaching a class. These are the words of a colleague of mine who was really a great teacher. He said, when we are teaching, we are not teaching the class. We are teaching individual students. And if you take a look at the quotation here coming from Thomas Smigel, okay, we don't focus on one size fits all. We're not teaching the class, but we are teaching a student, an individual person. Okay, we have to focus more on one student at a time. Because when you take a look at belonging, I think it is very important that each student in our class must feel that he is respected, that he is supported. In other words, that he belongs to that particular community, right? In other words, why will I take a chance on learning the content if I feel that I don't belong, if I feel that I am excluded from that particular community, if I feel that I am not supported, especially by the person who should be able to provide me with that particular support? All right? Remember, what are the enemies of learning or what are the enemies of teaching? Number one, boredom. I already know it. The second one is anxiety. The second one is anxiety. And precisely, if there is a lack of support on the part of the teacher, if the student feels that he does not belong to that particular classroom, to that particular community, then that particular student may not be able to learn or will not be able to learn precisely because he feels that he does not belong. And therefore, we go back to the point regarding I teach individual students in my classroom. Okay? Remember when there was this particular educator, I forget his name though, when they asked him, what are the most important indicators of good teaching? And he said there are only three. It's just like buying property, right? When you buy a property, it's about location, location, location. In teaching, it's about relationships, 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 right? So precisely, we can now have an initial connection to character education, okay? But later on, we'll take a look at belonging as a concrete connection to character education. That when we talk about a goal of character education, in the research literature, what is always emphasized is what we call a learning community. A learning community. It's not only about a it's not only about learning, but it's about a community of learners, a community that actually grapples with learning, but moves forward together. Okay? Moves forward together. They collaborate with one another. They work with one another. Because in that particular place, there is trust. There is confidence working with others, especially from the perspective of a student, that when we talk about the goal of the teacher is not perfection. The goal of the teacher is improvement on my part. Therefore, if I commit a mistake, the teacher will correct me. But that particular correction will help me improve. It is not meant to put me down. So what is the research telling us? Therefore, when we talk about belonging, right, that social skills are important. Social skills are important. And when we talk about social skills then, and there are certain skills that actually have something to do with belongingness. So for example, number one, do we teach our students active listening or even just listening? Do we teach our students how to take the perspective of someone, even if, for example, they don't agree with that particular person? Or do we teach our students, for example, empathy, of no matter how difficult it is, of placing themselves in the shoes of another person? Okay? Because the first teaching practice that we need to emphasize in this particular area is precisely we have to teach the social skills. We have to teach the social skills because here in this particular research finding, it is quite clear that social skills are important. You can see the numbers. The 54% more likely to earn a high school diploma, the twice as likely to attain a college degree, as well as 40%, 46% more likely to have full-time job at age 25. Now, that's the second point that I would like to make regarding the teaching practice is that the second one actually begins with the teacher. Actually, it's the first one. Actually, it's the first one. Okay? Because when we talk about teaching, teaching is not only a high skill, but actually teaching is also a high will profession. So meaning to say, this particular point is connected to actually the social skills. And I said a while ago that there is a need, okay? There is a need not only to let our students know that they are valued as individuals, high will, because that is our passion. But in other words, when we talk about the high will, even if, for example, it does not appear in the formal curriculum, in the academic curriculum, in the school curriculum, there is a need to teach social skills directly. There is a need to teach social skills directly because we cannot assume that our students know, okay, they know the social skills, that they can actually practice the social skills or even know the importance of social skills, active listening, perspective taking, etc. Okay? So it begins with the teacher giving value to each and every member of the class. But at the same time, right, relationships. But at the same time, the second one is because teaching is a high skill and high will, right? We have to take a look at important routines and habits precisely that need to be taught but do not actually appear in a formal document. And one of them precisely is belonging, including the social skills that has something to do with belonging. Because the social skills actually accentuate, help students develop that particular positive attitude, routine, or habit. Okay, let's take a look at the bullseye. What kind of a grade level action plan do we need to develop a sense of belonging among our students? I think this is important because when you go back to your own school, you have to take a look at how can I have an impact, well, beginning with my classroom and then later on with my colleagues. Because precisely when we talk about the goal of character education, it's a learning community, a goal. And a goal of, a goal of teachers working together is a professional learning community. It's a professional learning community. That in that particular community, teachers work together. So what kind of a grade level action plan do we need to develop? I think this is also an invitation that when, I guess, when a group of teachers coming from the same school are attending this particular session, that it is important to, well, come together and then take a look at how we can develop a sense of belonging among our students. Because precisely, it's one of the most important positive attitude or positive habit or positive routine. So do we have more strategies? Here are other points to consider. For grade school, maybe will not work with high school, maybe the lower years up to around grade 4. They conduct community circle. Okay? So it's a community circle, then the students, they talk. Okay, what are you good at? When are you happy? What are your dreams? Next year, when you move to grade 3, grade 2 to grade 3, okay, what do you want to accomplish, etc. Because it is an opportunity for the students to know one another. Precisely, perspective taking, empathy, active listening, right? So you develop a sense of community. There are other strategies that work. Number one, okay, the third one, positive greeting. They belong because the teacher, okay, greets them. And the teacher does not only greet them, the teacher knows his name or her name. That I am important to the teacher. The teacher knows me. The teacher knows my name, my nickname, right? Because the teacher spends a lot of time trying to know the students. Second one, actively listen to your students, attending to the meaning behind what they say. So this is active listening on the part of the teacher. What could be a fifth one? All right, take a look at this fifth one. Spend a couple of minutes each day with a struggling student or even probably a difficult student. And according to research, it makes a lot of difference. It makes a lot of difference. Now, let's take a look at the pleasant surprise. A sixth strategy, number 6, consistency. Consistency. You stick to your routines, greeting them, for example, when you enter the room, or, for example, okay, making sure that the classroom rules and procedures are followed and that you correct students when they don't follow the routines or procedures. Or, for example, that if you tell them that I will chat with you every quarter, at least once a quarter, that you chat with them, you try your best to chat with them at least once a quarter. Consistency, because when you talk about consistency, you honor an obligation to the class, you honor an obligation to the students. And here, being consistent comes from the deepest values of a teacher. And therefore, what is the connection to belonging? Well, I want to belong to a class wherein rules are consistent. I want to belong to a class wherein that particular learning environment is consistent. It's not chaotic. So it develops a sense of belonging on the part of the students. That's why, okay, it's a pleasant surprise that actually, when we are consistent in enforcing rules and regulations, in enforcing group work norms, then we are actually developing a sense of belonging on the part of our students. Perhaps it's the most important strategy. Perhaps it's the most important strategy. Okay, so what is the connection? Belonging and character education, the sequence. Why are these teaching practices important, especially from the perspective or using the lens of character development? Here is the connection. A central priority of any classroom, a central priority of the academic curriculum, and a central priority of character education is what we call positive student-teacher relationships, or a supportive classroom environment that actually is conducive, that allows the students to have the opportunity to learn. All right? Because without that opportunity to learn, then they will not be able to achieve the outcomes or the standards of whatever curriculum it is. And at the same time, if we have a supportive classroom environment, positive relationships, etc., it is linked to the emotional well-being of the student. That's according to research. So we have a very clear established relationship between that particular nurturing, enhancing, cultivating that particular positive routine, habit, or attitude of belonging, because it's a central priority, not only of academics, because learning cannot take place in an environment that is not conducive to learning, but also it is clearly connected to character education. One word, please. Using a word or a phrase. What are other strategies to make students feel they belong to your classroom? Because your classroom is a community. Because the classroom, your classroom, is a community. Okay, number one, attention control. Number two, we have belonging. Number three, let's now take a look at curiosity, confidence before curiosity. Okay, time to reflect. Okay, in case you have some questions or clarifications, you may write it down. If we will not be able to have the time later on to open the floor for questions or clarifications, Mr. Rentoy will give you my email address, and we can probably communicate via email in order to answer your questions or clarifications. Okay. Attention control or controlling one's attention, belonging, relatedness, identity. Let's now take a look at confidence. Confidence. The roots of confidence connected to Albert Bandura, something to do with self-efficacy. And you talk about a belief on the part of the student on his ability to learn or to accomplish a goal. Okay? Ability to learn or to accomplish a goal. Whether that particular goal has something to do, again, with what they are trying to learn in social studies. So, for example, in history, or for example, in maths or mathematics, something to do with algebra. Okay. It is the belief on the part of the student that I have the ability to learn. And this is very important because when you talk about self-efficacy, as you can clearly see in the second entry, it influences student success at a task. Whether that particular task has something to do with coming up with a performance task or answering a test, or let us say converting a certain sentence into a question that makes sense to the student, etc., etc. Okay, it affects their success at that particular task. So if they have what we call self-efficacy, or in other words, confidence, they will be more persistent and expend or spend more effort on that particular task. And therefore, because they spend more energy, they focus on it, they own it, that particular task, that particular set of goals, then there is a better chance for them to be able to achieve their objective or the objective. So let's now take a look at jumping from self-efficacy. Let's now take a look at that particular concept or routine or habit of confidence. It's the ability to produce the desired results. Okay. So number one, they are able to identify the desired result. They're able to identify the desired result. Number two, they do not only identify the outcome or the desired result, but number two, they see it as important to them. It has a connection to them. So meaning to say, it is something that is not imposed on them. And then the third one is they have the ability to produce the result, because it is not only about a belief, but rather in reality they are equipped with the knowledge and the skills and the values, right, to be able to produce that particular result, to be able to accomplish that particular task. So this is what we call confidence. And we want confident students in our classrooms. We want confident students in our classrooms. Let's now take a look at the importance of confidence. Now, a strong sense of self-efficacy or confidence has been shown to affect choices. And take a look at the second one. Okay? Maybe the third one is the most important because it talks about learning. But take a look at the second one. It also predicts engagement. It also predicts engagement, right? Remember when we talk about motivation, right? The student sees something important about a certain task, about a certain event, about a certain project or a product, etc. But when we talk about engagement, it is not only believing that it is important, but actually doing it. Because engagement is motivation in action. And this is the reason why we want confident students in our classroom. Because when we talk about confident students, we are actually talking about engaged students. We're talking about engaged students. They are able to identify, they're able to own, they are able to do, they're able to do. Okay? So, importance of confidence. And as a sidetrack, actually, when we talk about self-efficacy, it is not only important to students, it is also important to us teachers, right? And who said so? Again, meta-analysis. The teacher self-efficacy with indicators of educator well-being, including emotional exhaustion and burnout, stress, and mental health. So meaning to say, self-efficacious teachers, okay, they're not totally free. They're also vulnerable to it, but they are not likely to succumb to burnout, to stress, and mental health problem. They are not most likely succumb to. It does not mean that if you are self-efficacious, I am invulnerable. Okay, you're vulnerable too, but according to research, most likely you are not succumb to. And actually, if you take a look at the meta-analysis of effective teaching, one thing that comes into mind, which is actually the most powerful indicator of good teaching, and then of course learning, right? Because you talk about, okay, feedback. When you employ that particular strategy, it's a powerful it's a powerful teaching method. It's a powerful teaching strategy. When you take a look at practice, but that particular practice has what we call a goal, then it's a very powerful strategy. When you take a look at activating what the students know and linking it to the current lesson, it's a very powerful strategy. But the most powerful strategy, actually, the highest impact, is what we call collective efficacy. When the teachers know how to work together, when the teachers are rowing in one direction, when the teachers are trying to understand together, okay, and coming up with a plan together in order to address key issues in the school. It's actually the most powerful teaching practice, collective efficacy. Okay? So just a sidetrack. Now, okay, 1 minute just to take a look at that particular confidence point regarding confidence. Come up with a question about confidence before we take a look at a few strategies. Okay. In terms of how do I nurture confidence on the part of my students? Is confidence really important? How is confidence connected to character education as a positive habit or routine? Okay, here are the strategies. There. Words of encouragement. Uh, if there is an opportunity to praise, give the praise. If there's an opportunity to compliment the student. The students have to know. The students have to know. And that particular word of encouragement, as much as possible, must be specific. Must be specific. Remember, in the context of the classroom, who is the expert? The teacher. Who are the novices? The students. And they look up to the teacher to provide them with words of encouragement, precisely because they are learning the rudiments, for example, of the academic discipline in high school from the expert, from the mathematician, from the historian. So if you take a look at the second entry, these words inspire students with the desire, courage, and confidence to do the right thing for themselves and others. So that's the first strategy. Second strategy, and Liv Vygotsky reminds us about this particular very important principle of teaching, desirable difficulty. All right? Desirable difficulty. Okay. CPD, zone of proximal development. But nowadays, they call it desirable difficulty. It's desirable because it is just the right challenge for the student. Because if it is not the right challenge for the students, number one, I already know it, boredom. Number two, it's too difficult. I cannot hack it. I cannot learn it. Then, anxiety. And hopefully does not lead to stress or even probably burnout on the part of the student. It's the desirable difficulty. Therefore, when we talk about the desirable difficulty, we have to bring them out of their comfort zone, but not very, very far from that comfort zone. That particular lesson, that particular product, that particular project or the task is almost impossible to complete, is almost impossible to accomplish. And the only way we can do this is if we know our students. Remember when we talk about formative assessment, there are two very important schools of thought in formative assessment. Number one is assessment for learning, exemplified by feedback. And I think later on we're going to talk about it. The other one is data-based decision making. When you look at the data, study the data, okay, test scores, observation notes coming from teachers regarding the performance of students, grades, etc., etc. Okay, and then you derive conclusions or you infer conclusions from the data, and you come up with activities, etc., that are suited for that particular student. It means the desirable difficulty assumes that we know our students, that we are interested in our students. Do we have more strategies? The one that I mentioned a while ago. Give life to assessment for learning. And how do you give life to assessment for learning? The feedback, right? Formative assessment, assessment for learning, database decision making. Assessment for learning, how do you give life to it? The feedback is linked to an outcome. Because according to research, the students are more receptive to feedback when they develop a learning orientation. The feedback is not about the person, it's not about me. The feedback is about the outcome, it's about the objective. Now, another strategy and perhaps another pleasant surprise there. How do we develop confidence on the part of the students? When they listen to us, when they see us, when they hear us, when they imitate us, when they appreciate our teaching moves, etc., etc. Therefore, we model to them. Okay? Precisely because we are the experts inside the classroom. Diba? When we think aloud, okay, okay, let's now take a look at these procedures. Procedure number one. Now, sometimes you commit a mistake in doing procedure number one because you're thinking aloud. You're giving them the wisdom of what you have when you tried to learn that particular content. Number two, when you guide them, when you demonstrate, when you teach them by precisely demonstration, by modeling. Okay? And when you think aloud and when you guide them or guided experience, when you demonstrate, right? They clearly see that particular aspect of an important characteristic of a great teacher, an effective teacher, which is what we call teacher clarity. Teacher clarity. Okay. And it develops in them this particular strategy. We sometimes take it for granted that this is only actually for making sure that they learn the academic content. But it is actually also connected to character education. Because when you make sure that you develop confidence in them precisely by using teacher modeling, it means they realize that I am important to him. Okay? Because why would that particular teacher bother to go into those details of using a think aloud protocol, of demonstrating with clarity what needs to be done? That's another strategy. Okay? So let's now take a look at the connection to character education. And that particular connection to character education is when we talk about confidence, it is basically connected to responsibility. It's connected to responsibility. In the character education literature, when we teach responsibility, it's about giving students a positive sense of self. Okay? A positive sense of self. Remember, identify, commit to, and then action. Identify what is the goal or what are the goals. Number two, I own the goals. The goals are important to me. Okay. And then number three, I have the knowledge and the skills to be able to accomplish the goals. Because the confidence is not bravado. Confidence is not bravado. Precisely if it is bravado, it has nothing to do with responsibility. It has nothing to do with a clear idea of one's capabilities. Okay? When they see themselves capable of doing something, they are more likely to do it and take ownership of the choice and the action. Of the choice and the action. So confidence and responsibility. Okay, picture this visual image, probably a minute or two. Think of a visual image or images probably that best represents the importance of confidence in character education. Okay, so number one, attention control. Number two, relatedness, identity or belonging. Number three, from self-efficacy, confidence. Number four, curiosity.